is good, y'all? It's your boy The Shows, and if you're new to the channel, welcome to Shows World TV. Before we move on to this video, please turn on your bell notifications, subscribe to this channel if you're new. I make new videos for every Thursday. You already know the title, so let's just get right into it. So yesterday, I was watching a pretty insane movie on Hulu, a foreign film from Korea, Parasite. This came out last year, and I just saw the movie, but a lot of people were talking about it. There are spoilers in this video, so if by some miracle you haven't seen this movie yet, please click out of this video and then come back to it, okay? So let's just go right into it. So the basic synopsis of this whole thing is that it's a poor versus rich story. You know, an upper class versus poor, disproportionate family, and they basically scam their way into this family, you know, working as servants to get money. Now, I will say that this movie is a social commentary piece in my opinion, and definitely speaks to just how out of touch the rich might be and how severe it can be for people who are on the lower, class side of things. So this is a story that could even relate to any other race for that matter. The Kims, who are the poor family in this film, and the Parks, who are the rich family in this story. And so this all started because a family friend of the Kims had suggested that they work for the rich because they pay very well. Understandable, because they were struggling. You can see that in the beginning of the movie with where they live. It's very shifty and very, like, how you can say, kind of a sketch area, and it's a very small compacted apartment they're in. I don't know if you could really call it an apartment, but it's a very closed off house where they are, and every house is literally close to each other, kind of stacked, next to each other. So not very good living conditions. You could see bugs on the table as they're eating, among other things. Things that you wouldn't want to be dealing with if you lived in a house. But anyway, y'all. So after the family friend has suggested that the Kims work for the rich, right? This all started with the son. And the son has started tutoring the rich Park daughter to help her with, I'm guessing, her English. Because, she figured that, well, the father and the mother have figured, since the family friend had recommended them, right, that he should be good. So after some convincing, the son had started basically tutoring the daughter for English, and she develops a crush on him. Mind you, this daughter is still in high school. The Park daughter, and the son Kim, I'm guessing he's like in his early 20s. But he said that he would ask her once she, hits university, which I'm like, I don't really make it any better in my opinion. But anyway, once that was all established, right? Once he had convinced them that he was, certified to, tutor the daughter, the Park daughter, right? So then next was the Kim daughter, right? She had manipulated her way into tutoring the eccentric Park's son. I'm gonna say, like, he's probably about maybe 9-10 years old in the film. They made it seem like the kid was like unstable and stuff, but he actually was pretty good at art. And so that was part of the tutoring that the Kim daughter ended up doing. Basically, like, I guess they call it, like, I guess you could say therapy, art therapy, among other things. So she was talking to the mom about it, and made up this whole thing about being some expert psychologist when really she wasn't. So once that was now established, now it was on to the father, and this is where the Kim daughter had came in, because after a successful tutoring, the driver that was for the Parks had drove the Kim daughter home, right? And I guess the driver was kind of flirting with her, trying to get a date out of her, and the Kim daughter had said no. So then I guess to further plant their, their plan, right? She had took off her panties and dropped it onto the floor of the car, and then she left the car. And so I think it was discovered by Mr. Park the next day once he was being driven home and stuff, right? So as Mr. Park and his wife were discussing the whole thing, they had thought that basically the driver was having sex in the car, and they thought that the driver was having sex with the Kim daughter, who was helping to tutor their son. But it turns out, obviously that's not what was the case. But even though that was the case, it was also true that the driver had never had sex in that car. It just made it seem like that was the case. With the Kims, they manipulated the situation, like I said. You see how crazy that is, right? But anyway, so without any warning, without really giving any reason, they fired the driver. And then now the Kim father, right, he ends up becoming the new driver. So now he's been integrated into the family. So now once that has been established, right, the next phase plan of theirs, the next plan in their phase, to get their whole family established, right? The housekeeper, right, the old housekeeper, she had actually been around in that house longer before the Parks had moved in. And it turns out that she knew the architecture, the architect who had worked on the house, among other things. And so there's a backstory to this, once I get further into the review. But yeah, basically she had been around for a long time, and then she ended up working for the Parks. She could have, from what I understand, had found a way to purchase the house, but I think she didn't for some reason, and then she just decided to work for the Parks instead. And she'd been around them for a while, and she was a pretty good housekeeper from what they said in the film. But so now, in order to get now the Kim mom to be the new housekeeper, the Kim daughter had actually figured out that the old housekeeper had an allergic reaction to peaches. There was a forbidden, no peach rule in the house. They couldn't eat the fruit. At first, I was like, why? And then I figured out, oh, it's because, the old housekeeper has an allergic reaction to that. So the Kim daughter had figured out some way to get some, I guess, peach powder and spray it. Not spray it, but really like sprinkle it on the housekeeper. And she ended up getting severely sick. When the Kim father had came in with the Parker, with Mr. Park's wife, he pretended to make it seem as if the housekeeper had been coughing up blood in the garbage can. Again, insane how they did that. And so, without any rhyme or reason, once again, now the housekeeper gets fired. So now the Kim mom is now the new housekeeper. Hope you're following along. So now the whole family now has been integrated into this entire thing. And they have no idea that all these people are related, as family. I didn't mention this, but the family friend was actually the former tutor. So that's how he got recommended. I forgot to mention that. Yes, the family friend had mentioned to the Kims to have the son, work for the family. So he became the new tutor once the family friend stopped being a tutor because he was going away. So once this is all done with, right, the Parks decide that they're gonna go on a family camping trip with the son, and I guess you could say celebrate his birthday. Yeah, because his birthday was coming up. Why'd I say guess? Anyway, yeah, to celebrate his birthday, but then it ended up raining real hard where they were, so they were coming back, right? But before that happened, the Kims were all in the family, just, and they were all in the house, just, celebrating their scam victory and drinking beer, eating a whole lot of, food, and just everything's on the floor. They're just having a grand old time, right? But then their celebration is interrupted by none other than the old housekeeper, and she's ringing the doorbell. They're not expecting it. It's really late at night. So once they get to the doorbell and they realize it's the old housekeeper, still with the rash on her face, among other things, basically they let her in because she said that she forgot something. Now I really did think she forgot an item, I guess, but that's not really what it was. So they see her struggling to open this case that's in the kitchen, which apparently leads to a door behind that case for the kitchen. Now it turns out, y'all, there's an underground bunker inside the house where for some strange reason her husband, the old housekeeper's husband, is living in the basement. They got a whole pantry down there of non-perishables. They got a toilet. They have everything that basically they need to live down there. And apparently what's been going on is that the old housekeeper at night would be sneaking food to her husband. Which leads into another story that's going to be told about, because Mr. Park's wife was actually discussing that briefly, that there had been something traumatic that had happened to Mr. Park's son. So it turns out that Mr. Park's son had discovered the old housekeeper's husband one night while eating his birthday cake, and he thought he saw a ghost, but really, like I said, it was the old housekeeper's husband sneaking upstairs to try and get food. He passed out, and that was the story that Mr. Park's wife had told Mr. Kim's daughter, who was tutoring his son. Once this was all figured out, right, they were confused because they had no idea, this underground bunker was there. And apparently the Parks had no idea that the underground bunker was there. But the family that was living there before, right, when the old housekeeper was there, they had basically built it there so that if there was ever, like, I guess, a pandemic, a nuclear fallout, things like that, they could just go underground. But somehow, by some craziness, like, the Parks, they didn't know. So I just found that strange that they wouldn't have figured that out, but maybe they weren't told by the real estate agent. I don't know. I'm getting too deep into this, but yeah. So to follow up, so basically now this is all figured out. The old housekeeper was sneaking food to her husband in the basement. Now, I can't remember exactly why he was in the basement, but from what I understand, he had lost his job and he needed, he had actually lost his job when a cake shop that he was working for had went bust. And so it's crazy because Mr. Kim was talking about this at the beginning of the movie, and I just remembered that. See, my memory was kind of crazy with this, but now it's getting back. So yeah, Mr. Kim was talking to his family about how a cake shop had went bust, and he was actually one of the people that got fired, the old housekeeper's husband. So he was living there because he knew that his wife was working for the park, so that he just stayed there for the time being. But it's just weird that for 4 years he was staying down there not working, and nothing had been established, which I just found weird for them. But anyway, getting too deep into this, getting too deep into the rabbit hole of the conspiracies and among other things. But I just try to make logic sense out of things, y'all. Mr. Kim's wife had actually went down in the basement with the old housekeeper to her husband, but because they snuck into the basement, they figured it out too. The Kims. So they went up, they were hiding. They were trying to hide from the old housekeeper, but then she found them. Once she put two and two together, she was able to figure out that they were all related, and she was about to expose their secret because she took video of them. But then a fight ensued. The old housekeeper was going to go up the stairs to try and tell the Parks what was going on once they were coming inside, but then Mr. Kim's wife had basically kicked the old housekeeper down the stairs. She ended up with a crushing blow to her head. She was in a coma, but then she died of her injuries eventually while down there. The old housekeeper's husband was tied up and left in a corner, basically to fend for himself, in a sense. The Parks had decided to, rest for the night. Mr. Kim and his wife were sleeping in the living room on the couch, and the Kims had to hide under the table, while Mr. Kim's wife was still working there as a housekeeper, just, kind of keeping busy so that they could sneak out, right? But now, once they all sneak out, and it's the next day, when the Kims had finally escaped, their house had flooded during that night with the rain. And it's so crazy because you see the difference because, of course, the parks where they lived, nothing was flooded. They were all fine. But then where, the Kims had lived, everything was flooded. Everything was just damaged in their house, among other things. But they went back, to work for the Parks as if nothing had happened. You know, much like I'm sure most people would probably do in real life, which is just crazy and sad. But that's the unfortunate reality of the poor versus rich type of scenario. A party is planned, right? Since the camping trip was canceled the other day. But now the other thing is that while this was all going on, the son decided to get eccentric the night before the party was being planned, okay? And he put up a tent in their backyard, their very big backyard, while it was raining that night. And he could see the light flickering in the living room, right? And it turns out that the housekeeper's husband was banging his head on the light fixture button that was in the underground basement to do Morse code, because apparently the son was a scout and he would have figured out that message. So he was writing stuff down for SOS. They never tapped into that, and somehow the Parks didn't know that he was writing Morse code. So now the party's being planned, right? And everything's going according to plan. Being that the Kims know that the old housekeeper's husband is down there, they decide, as they're preparing the food for the party, to sneak a plate downstairs. But the old housekeeper's husband was pretty upset at the fact that he figured out his wife had died. He runs after the son who was bringing down the plate. Mr. Kim's son, he runs up trying to escape the old housekeeper's husband. He ends up falling after being trapped in some kind of wiring. And so then the old housekeeper's husband takes a rock and basically smashes it onto his head, knocking him out cold. He's not dead, he just lost a lot of blood. Mr. Park's daughter had figured out that Mr. Kim's son was on the floor just bleeding out. But even after all of that, right, the old housekeeper's husband decides to come out, get some food, and then he goes out into the backyard, and then he stabs Mr. Kim's daughter, right? And she falls to the floor. Mr. Kim's wife, she decides to stab the old housekeeper's husband. And once this is all done with, Mr. Park is yelling at Mr. Kim, to throw him the keys so that he basically can escape the party, because everyone was going crazy that was at that party for Mr. Kim for Mr. Park's son. Everyone was going crazy. Everyone was in a panic after, the whole stabbing and everything. Mr. Kim's wife had stabbed the old housekeeper's husband, killing him. Mr. Kim had decided to stab Mr. Park, killing him, but there was a reason for that. See, during when they were hiding the night before, Mr. Park and his wife were complaining about a smell that they were smelling throughout the house, and they said the smell was very similar to, the Kims or whatever. Now, what upsetted them about this was that Mr. Park was saying that basically poor people, basically have a certain smell to them, or people who ride the subway have a certain smell to them. Now, again, this is a class warfare type story, so you could see why that would trigger Mr. Kim. So as Mr. Kim was giving Mr. Park the keys, after the stabbing, like I said, he put his hand over his nose, and that kind of triggered Mr. Kim. So then Mr. Kim was upset because he remembered what Mr. Kim had, Mr. Park had said the night before, and so he stabbed him. If I sound like I'm rambling names, y'all, it's because I'm tired and I'm doing this like after 2 in the morning, y'all. So forgive me. And this light's kind of, making my head sweat. It's very bright. But yo, so basically, now to wrap up. Mr. Kim has stabbed Mr. Park. He's dead. But, everyone else had run off. Mr. Kim's son was being carried off by Mr. Park's daughter. Mr. Kim's wife had actually escaped. Once this was all done with, right, Mr. Kim had actually escaped into the underground bunker and stayed there for the time being. Once the craziness had all settled down, nobody gets arrested. They can't find Mr. Kim because, again, he escaped into the underground bunker. Of course, being that the old housekeeper's husband had knocked out Mr. Kim's son, he suffered some brain damage and he woke up in the hospital. They got probation. They weren't sent to jail. And after this is all done, whatever, the house gets sold to a different family eventually. but again, they lied. I think the real estate agent had lied to the new family, and Mr. Kim was still down there the whole time. And now this fantasy had played out at the end, where Mr. Kim's son ends up buying the house, and then, you know, Mr. Kim comes out from the bunker eventually, you know, and they all eventually do live in the house, you know, owning it. But that was pure fantasy being played out. But overall, I would say this story was insane, intriguing, and again, it plays into the social commentary of poor versus rich. And I would also say it's crazy because this movie suggests that most rich people are naive to the problems of the world. I wouldn't say all of them, but I would say most of them could be seen as out of touch, and I could see why this story would play out the way it would. I mean, because the whole time you're rooting for the Kims, you know, to succeed, but at the same time, it's like they scammed their way to the top. But then there are some people who would probably say, isn't that what most people do to get to the top? You know, climbing on the backs of others. Now, I want to know what y'all think in the comments section, all right? I want you to discuss this with me, okay? I really would recommend seeing Parasite. If I had to rate the movie, I would give it like an 8 out of 10. Yeah, that's my review, y'all. This is the end of the video, so if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, share, comment, or subscribe. I make new videos for every Thursday, so don't forget to hit that bell every time I make a new video. Okay, this is Show's World TV. For those of y'all who don't know, I make reactions, sketches, and vlogs. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter on the Likee app, where I post more videos there that I can't show here because of copyright situations. Download all of my latest music, whether for streaming, for free, or for purchase. Okay, I will put the links for all of that in the description down below as well. I have a music page. You can subscribe to me there on YouTube. I'll put that at the end screen card here. Alright, so, and if it's not there, I'll put it in the link in the description down below. But yo, if you want more videos like this, click that playlist right there. And if you want to see my more recent reaction video, click that right there. Alright, y'all, so I'm gonna head up out of here. This light is making me sweat. I'm tired. Like I said, it's like after 2 in the morning I'm doing this. But yo, it's been real. It's your boy The Shows, and I will see you guys next time when I upload. Peace.